Hello, my name is Alan Marks. This video is going to talk about statistics. Why we use statistics? Because of variation. Just about every measurement that can be made has some variation. In addition, the only way to find out if a result is repeatable is to repeat it. And by repeating it, I mean repeating it exactly. You do exactly the same thing twice and see how different the result is. The bigger the variation, the more repeats are required. Now, typically, chemical and physical experiments are fairly repeatable. Biological experiments, like how high a certain plant will grow in a certain amount of time, that's somewhat more variable. And therefore, if you do an experiment like that, you need to have several different plants and uh, you need to do repeats. For human behavior, that's probably the most variable whatsoever. And many science projects are based on some kind of human activity. And so, if you do that type of experiment, you really need to have a lot of people or a lot of different situations to make a judgment about. Scientists have to assure themselves that the results that they observe are real and not just due to variation. When you do an experiment, you design it in such a way that you keep certain variables constant. You set values for certain other variables, different values, and then you measure the effect of those changing conditions on the variable that you're studying. That's the dependent variable. There are also something called lurking variables. These are variables that you don't know about, or they make an effect on your results that you're not aware of. And that's why you need to think about them and need to keep certain things constant. You need to decide on ranges and have a measure of the accuracy and precision of your measurements. And that you generally do using pilot experiments, which I talk about in uh, another video. And you need to decide how many times you are going to repeat a given experiment. You need to decide how you're going to measure the dependent variable. And you can use a standard procedure that you find in the literature, or using a mentor or your teacher, or you can devise one yourself. The originality will give you uh, some kudos from the judges, but you have to make sure that you're measuring what you think you're measuring. Now, the experimental error will depend on your measurement techniques. Okay, for example, if you're trying to measure a mass, you can use a pan balance or an analytical balance. If you're measuring a volume, you can use a measuring cup or a pipette. If you're measuring a time, you use a clock or a stopwatch. You can see you have different degrees of precision. It also depends on the scale. The larger the scale, the uh, the better the precision is on a relative basis. And of course, you can introduce more variability from your calculations. If you subtract two similar quantities, the relative precision goes down appreciably. Here's an example of density measurements. For example, with density, you have to measure a volume and a mass. And so if you use a pan balance and a measuring cup, your accuracy depends on the scale, of course, and it's either 1% or a tenth of a percent. If you use an analytical balance and a pipette, it improves your precision to a hundredth of a percent or a thousandth of a percent. Also, there's a statistical way of determining the sample size. And if you're relatively good in statistics, and there's a rule of thumb that you can use that is dependent upon the standard deviation of the differences in your independent variable values. Now, depending on how your grade level, you would be expected to have some statistics no matter what your experiment. You oftentimes can plot your data, and that gives you an idea um, of your accuracy and precision. Um, but you also need to include data summaries in your experiment, a measure of the center or the average or median value of several replicates, and also a measure of the spread, the maximum and minimum or the standard deviation of the different replicates. If you're a secondary student, you should be able to use comparison of averages. And there are several statistics that do that, t-tests, confidence intervals, etc., or linear regression. If you have a variable and you want to see how a mathematical relationship between how that changes. Now, I've included a page that shows you some trustworthy web sources for learning about statistics and additional resources for you to consider when you're trying to learn about the statistics. So thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great science fair.